What's going on, advocates? Welcome back to another edition of the Black Mental Health Podcast. I'm your host, Reg. Joined today with me is a special guest. I love when I get the black males, the therapists on here, so I can pick their brain for free because they're gonna charge for it tomorrow. I don't introduce anybody, brother, because I don't like to forget credentials and all of the things that you guys worked hard for. Anybody that's achieved anything in life, so please introduce yourself to the people.
I'm Corey Burton. I'm a therapist. I have a practice. I've been licensed for I think like about a year. I just realized it. Yeah, it's crazy. But I started my practice in October, Belief in Me counseling. And that was like my leap for this last, I want to say 6 months or so. So I've been at it for about 6 or 7 months. Had my master's in mental health counseling, 8 years of experience in the field, maybe 8, 9 years in the field. I started out in drug and alcohol, and then I transitioned into co-occurring, and now I'm strictly into working with adults in mental health.
So a little side story. Me and Corey went to the same college. I dropped out. Y'all know I'm going back, repping Drexel right now, but I'm going back. But Corey finished and did what he was supposed to do when he was supposed to. Was that what you had idealistically when you left SHIP?
I went through a bunch of different phases. Like
Okay.
it was interesting. Like going to college for me was just the next step. So realistically, I didn't care about college until I got to grad school. So it was kind of wild that I even finished because I was just kind of going through the motions. I almost failed out my first year. I went back because that first summer I went home and I was on academic probation, and I got the letter that was like, if you don't bring your grades up, you can't come back for, I think it was like 5 years at the time.
Oh wow.
Yeah, it was wild. And I seen the letter and I'm like, I probably don't want to go back. I tried to come back earlier, but I didn't have a car and nobody would come get me. So I was stuck in Shippensburg. But I went to Philly, I worked, and I hated it. I just hated it. And I was living, my brother raised me. So I went back to live with him, but this was the first time I had to work. Like before, I would work for myself, but I had to work. And I was doing security. I hated it so much. I didn't have a license. I didn't have my car. I would have to like call every day to get somebody to drive me to certain places. So I had to make a decision to either start my life back in Philly or start my life in SHIP. And after that summer, I was just like, I need to start my adult life. And that was kind of where it started. But I was lost, essentially all through college, just going through the motions. I had one teacher, Mr. Fred, that did psychology in undergrad. I mean, not in undergrad, in high school. So I was like, oh, that's the only class I like. So I just declared psychology because they told me I had to declare a major. Like I was really just doing the next thing. Like I'm not a school person. Like it's still wild to me that I even went to school for so long. It is. I went to SHIP and I was an exercise science major. I graduated high school with a 2.1 GPA. I had to do the summer program to get into SHIP.
Me too, ASP.
Yeah. And I didn't like that either. Like it was a culture shock. Like that was the big thing. And I didn't notice it at the time that was affecting me. Like I'm just like, oh, I just don't like being up here, I had a girlfriend at the time that went to a different school. So I was just like, I don't want to be here. Like this is not where my mind is. So I would say I got lucky at the beginning. But I think at any given time, I always had like one good person around me. And a lot of times that defaulted to my brother. My brother that raised me. He didn't go to school, but he has all the values that's important to me, and he's like the successor of do the right thing, do what's for you. But at some point our roads kind of split and I had to figure it out. So it was almost like a finding like I was almost following his path until it stopped. And I'm like, dang, I gotta find my own path now.
Mm.
So it was an interesting journey, but I definitely where I am now, I didn't really figure this out until after grad school. So I was into the field.
The reason why I ask is because I'm in the process. A few years ago, maybe from like I want to say around 2016 to like maybe 20, right before the pandemic. And then the pandemic just shifted everything with everybody. I used
Mm-hmm.
to ask like, when do people, and I don't want to use nothing offensive, but when do people get stuck in jobs? Like, when does that
Yeah.
transition of like, I feel like we go to school, we do these things, and like, yo, I'm going to take over the world. I'm going to do all of these different things,
Mm-hmm.
and then at some point, you just settle into a life, and um I'm starting to realize that's happening now in front of me. I'm like, oh, I was looking for the mark, and now I see the mark where people are settling into their lives. And then now I'm like, all right, is this now I'm backtracking to ask the people who are in their careers, is this what they wanted to do when they grew up? Because I know it shifts over time. And sometimes like I don't know if the trash man wanted to be the trash man when he was a kid, or the
Mm-hmm.
trash or the firewoman that was, is this what you wanted to do when you were a kid, or this is something that you fell into? You know what I mean?
Yeah. I I and I think we've talked before, and I think I kind of see this in you too, and I don't mean this in an offensive way. I think I was a leech. Like
Mm,
I would get a job and I would want to do that.
mm,
So I was working at Advanced Auto Parts and I started learning about cars and I was like, oh, I want to be a mechanic.
mm,
I was working food service and I was like, oh, I want to be a cook. There was a time I wanted to be a cook. I went to ship in 2008 and that was when the presidential election was going on for Barack Obama. And I was like, oh, I want to go into politics.
mm.
And I took and dropped my first politics class like 2 weeks later because I was like, nah, this ain't it. But I was really a leech. And that was part of finding my way. Like as I've had insecurities through my entire life.
Mm.
I never questioned my ability to be successful though. Like I've had so many insecurities about different things, but I've always known like I know I can work and I know I can do good at what I do at work. Like work is my thing.
Mm,
So anytime I would get into something, the passion will run out.
mm,
And that was what was happening to me a lot. So I was doing the mechanic thing and I was actually doing that when I was finishing up and starting to work in drug and alcohol. And I loved working in drug and alcohol. But as soon as I found that, I was like, damn, I got to do an oil change today. Like, it was just like the little things like, oh, I got to do this, I got to do that. And I was like, maybe I'm not as passionate about it. And this is more a hobby or this is something I like to do on the side. But I don't want that to be the thing to be my primary income. That was the thing that became important to me because I'm like, I don't care about the money in the sense of like wanting to be rich. Like I have to care about the work that I'm doing. I have to maintain the passion. So that was when I got into drug and alcohol, it just felt like where I belong. And that was my sign.
Yeah, and we it was something you told me, and we'll get into it, but that I hang my hat on that too with the work. The insecurity things is what I'm hanging right now and thinking about, like, because I feel the same way. Like whatever I get into, I know I had no doubt about success, but
Mhm.
always a little vulnerable in the way that you obtain that success, and
Yeah.
trying to figure out like, is this the right vehicle that you're supposed to be using? And one of the things you told me was like, you may be already doing what you think you're trying to strive for, and
Hmm.
you might be missing it. So if you can just lean into the uncomfortability of how you're feeling now, you could be doing it. In full transparency, we talked beforehand before we was recording. I'm like, I'm burnt out, but as soon as I come on here, the energy comes and I'm ready to have a conversation. So I know I just need to take a pause from things, but I know I will never leave. And so I think it's interesting that you mentioned that.
Yeah, and that the insecurities is big because like I outside. So what happened with me was I actually worked. I grew from work out. So I think a lot of people go on like a self discovery and they find themselves, and then they start to shape everything around that.
Mm,
But for me, my most confident place was at work. Like who I was when I worked at a rehab, who I was there, none of my friends knew that person.
mm,
And it was weird. Like I had friends over 20 years and they've never seen that confident person I was when I was working in drug and alcohol. And there's people who was there for treatment who got the best version of me. Um, and I could not bring that outside of work. Like I couldn't. Like I was like when I get outside of work, and it was really like an identity thing. I was like, I don't know who I am. And I'm always talking about work.
mm,
And I'm like, that's who I am. Like I'm somebody that works. Anytime somebody see me, I'm either going to work or coming from work. And
mm,
that's how I've been since high school. So, a lot of those interpersonal skills and just doing things, like I have interest in everything, but it was always so wide. I listen to all kinds of music. I watch all kinds of shows. I have all kinds of friends. So I was always blending in with where I was. Not that I didn't like where I was, but that wasn't completely me. So they got to see this version of me. And then this group got to see this version of me. And this group got to see this version of me. And I wouldn't let the groups blend.
mm,
But at work, I was me.
mm,
And I was like, I have to be one because if I'm not, they would know it.
mm.
And they would just be like, oh, I'm just gonna do whatever because you're not even being real. So why would I?
Right. It's something me and my wife were just talking about it last night, and we was discussing like Will Smith, not the Jada and Will part, but in his
Mhm.
book he talked about they used to get in order for him to become a character, he has to embody that character. So there he's like living, breathing, and even using that outside of the acting role. And he said
Mhm.
it used to be hard for him to break character and find his character that he plays in his real life. Like we have, and I look at it like wrestling. Like the rappers, they all got their character that they're
Yeah.
playing, portraying in their career, and sometimes I even struggle with it with myself in full transparency of, is this a character of a mental health person that I'm portraying, or is this me that I'm allowed to use in different capacities of who I am? You get what I mean?
Mhm. Yeah, I definitely do. And I think that happens so often. Like there's so much of that. And for me, I had that same thing when I started my practice
Mm,
because there's nobody else's name on it. So
mm,
anything that comes out of this practice is me.
mm,
So at the beginning and like through a large portion of my career, I'm in the female dominated field. So I was branded, I'm a black male. So you must want to work with all the problems. You must want to work with all the black people. You must want to do this. And there was this obligation I had at the beginning that it wasn't even about, is this what I want to do yet?
mm,
And now that I'm here and I have my own practice, it's an obligation that I appreciate.
mm,
I started my practice, and for the first 3 months, all of my clients was black males.
mm.
And I was hyped to go to work. I'm like, I'm talking to people and I'm meeting people that, grew up in different cities. And we're like relating on things. And usually these are things I have to think about. Like, do I want to show you this?
Mm,
And I have this professional character that I can put on, but you do get a blend of how much of myself can I show?
mm,
There was so much I had to revamp when I went to ship because I grew up in Philly. I grew up in the city. That was who I was, but I was never like that guy. You know, like the opportunity to sell drugs and stuff came up, and I'm like, I don't know if I'm about being in jail. Like, I'm not. That ain't me. But the irony of it was, I went through a good portion of my life waiting to go to jail, just because all the black males I knew went to jail. So I didn't know why. I didn't know what I was going to go for, but I'm like, yeah, at some point, and I went through a time, and this is really the vulnerability of it, of like envying that. I saw people who had that tough exterior, and now I'm good with it. I identify myself as more of a empathetic or sensitive male, but I was not comfortable with that. That was a hard, because where I grew up at and everything, like, people weren't that way. So I'm like, I can't wait to grow into that person, the person that goes to jail and comes out and is good, or that doesn't show any emotions and all these other things. So there was this dilemma of like, I grew up and I learned to be this way, but I'm also this way. And then I go to ship, and the irony was, I leaned so much more into what I learned, that I was even more Philly than I was when I was living in Philly. Like, and it was just because I was like, I don't know who I am up here. Like, nobody has that expectation for me to have this tough exterior. Like, I'm meeting people from everywhere, and they're good, being scared or not knowing, and having their parents around and having things to support them and everything. And I'm like, I don't know what it's like to be that way. Like, we usually all have a script that we follow and we stick to it.
No, and man, you said a lot of gems in there and jewels, and it's so, this is why I don't have questions, Corey, because it's so many, it's so much great conversation that comes out of like not having questions, and different ways you can go into it. Because I'm even thinking about within myself, because like you said, you grow up in Philly. If it was up, I see it in my son now. My son, he's the most nerdiest kid in the world. And I was just telling his mom that yesterday, of like, or not even yesterday, but the other day, I'm like, this is what happened when resources is around you to cultivate what's already in you. And so with me, I wanted to be the nerd, the podcast guy, all these different things, but because of lack of resources or different things, now I'm deterred to go into a different field and capacity, where that the one, if I had a preference, it probably wouldn't be in this capacity. So I'm trying to rob, and knowing that it's not for me. I'm trying, selling drugs, doing these different things, that because that's local to my environment, I'm just trying to, even though, and I feel like that's like 8 out of 10 boys, where you got 2 that's probably really about that. They want to do that. They want to wreak havoc or whatever the case may be. But a lot of young men are just trying to find their place in their role, and they happen to get in that way. And so I'm that's, it's funny because I'm learning that as I see like my son grow and learn more and more about myself.
Yeah, and it's wild. Like, my best friend that I grew up with from middle school, I forgot about this. So there was this part of me that kind of knew I was getting into this, but it was you know, it was the hoop dream after the hoop dream. When I found out I was only going to be as tall as I was like, I guess I'm not going to the NBA. Like,
I didn't find that out till ship. I one ship hit me. I'm like, I guess I'm not a football player.
It was, and I was like on it. I had all the highlights that everybody that went to the NBA had. I'm like going outside, shooting the basketball all day, playing basketball, always got the ball with me. All I did was move. I moved, and nobody around me played basketball. And I'm like, well, guess I'm not going to the NBA. And then I started seeing like everybody in my family, like, they height was capping out at like 5'9". And I'm like, I don't even think I'm getting 5'9". Like, it was wild. But my best friend, we talked about like doing therapy in middle school. Like, we had like the plans to go to the same high school, same college. We ended up going to different high schools and different colleges. But we both ended up doing it. And it's weird that, the ship kind of corrected that way. So like, in some capacity, I've always liked to get to know people. And that was the only pieces I had. But again, like, there was no I was in the foster care system for a good portion of my life. Um, and I had to go to therapy.
Mm.
I've never had a therapist that I was like, oh, that person is cool. There was this one guy, he was our caseworker, and he kind of followed our family even after we was done with our case. That's the only person, and he was a white guy, so I will never take away anything that he did for us, but that wasn't like the I want to be him.
Mm.
He was just the guy that helped the family, but there was no role models for the skills that I had.
Mm.
There was nobody enforcing it. Like, people was keeping me from stuff, like, I whether it was intentional or unintentional, people was keeping me out of stuff, and I was mad because I'm like, I want that, but I know I'm not that. Like, I
Mm.
know I'm
Mm.
not. And I was always around it.
Mm.
Um, I've I've witnessed, I've been involved in a lot of traumatic things, and it it made me go within myself.
Mm.
And that became my greatest coping skill up until I realized it was unhealthy. Like,
Mm.
and I was like 24 when I realized that. So, graduated, got a job, everything, had a group of friends, had the most unhealthy coping skill while I'm talking to people all day about, you shouldn't do this and you shouldn't isolate for that. And I'm like doing the same exact thing. Like, and I had a breakdown one day.
Mm.
And this shit. So, do you remember on Friday, and when he was smoking PCP, and he
Mm.
was like naked in the street?
Mm.
I didn't do that, but it was like 2 in the morning, and I have nightmares. I still have nightmares to this day, but I have better coping skills to cope with them. But um, this was when I found out, like, if I sleep in complete darkness, silence, I have nightmares. So
Mm.
it's 2 in the morning, and I wake up and I can't breathe and I don't know what's going on. So I take off all my clothes and I lay on the floor. And that's the only thing I could think to do. And
Mm.
I'm like, I don't know what's going on right now. Like, I've never experienced this in my life. And I'm sitting there and I'm like, and it passes after, like 20 or 30 minutes. And I'm like, what was that?
Right.
like,
Right. Right.
like, and by this point, I'm 2 years into working in drug and alcohol treatment. So I know what a panic attack is. I know what it looks like. I've helped people. I've been with people through them. I've talked people through them. I've done all the things. I legitimately thought I was invincible to mental health at that point without even really knowing it. Like, I'm the one that's teaching everybody. And I had this my first panic attack at 24. And I ended up talking to this lady at my job, and I didn't even want to talk to her. Like, I don't know why I went to her office. And I broke down and I was talking to her, and we talked for like maybe 20, 30 minutes. And then I left. Uh, that was the most I've talked to anybody in my life up until that point. All the counseling I did, all the family, all the friends. I have great support. I've always had great support, but I've never used them. And I talked to this lady. I mean, she's a good friend now, but at the time we were just coworkers. Um, and I was drawn to her for some reason. Uh, and that was when I realized, like, I can't keep living how I'm living.
Mm.
I can't keep isolating. I can't keep keeping everything to myself. I can't keep acting like everything's cool when it's not.
Mm. Man, again, dropping gem at the gems and jewels at the jewels, man. And thank you for sharing everything that you're sharing so far. Listen, I was supposed to end it and cut it short, but I got like so many questions because you don't woke me up. I told you I was burnt out before the conversation, but now you don't woke me up. I'm excited to talk now. You talked about the growing up in the foster care system. Like, for those who haven't experienced that, and I know you can't, sum up everyone experiences,
Mhm.
But what would you tell kids that are struggling with the foster care system as, finding their identity growing up, or like that share your similar story?
Um, that's a hard one because me and my brothers have only been split up once.
Mm,
So I've always had them protecting me. Um, and I think if anything, that would be the thing is like finding somebody safe that you can look up to. Like
mm,
anybody that knows me knows about my brothers. Um, my oldest brother is the one that raised me, so that's the one I kind of always talk about. My middle brother, he he showed me, he almost showed me what life was.
mm,
We had such a good connection, and a good bond that, he was like the coolest person to me. I mean, still to this day, like, and it would be like just the simplest stuff. It was who he was. It was him being willing to go and do anything. But I think that's what it is. It's like it's finding that person when, because it's scary, especially when you're in the foster care system. I was in a couple different homes. I was in a group home before. Um, it's scary to trust people, but if somebody's safe and really finding people who can explain to you what safety is and what safety looks like, it's scary to start trusting, but it's like giving somebody a chance.
mm,
Like I think that is probably the best thing that happened for me. Like I had my brothers there, but I had to be open to being protected by them.
mm,
I had to do that, and I had even to this day, like I'll call my brother. There was a long time in my life I would call my brother and ask him about little things, like, oh, I want to buy this TV,
mm,
and I have $2,000, and I'm like, there's this TV. I had this little TV. It was like $250, and I call my brother. I'm like, should I buy it? And he's like, yeah, like if you want something for yourself, like you can buy something for yourself. But at the time, I needed that like reassurance.
mm,
And as I grew up and I started to get a little bit better with money and everything, I was like, okay. Um, but it's finding that person that you can trust and that you can start talking to. It's scary, but it's so important when you start to find that. And I say that person, but as it develops and as soon as it can, it should be multiple people, just so you don't have a dependence on one person and it doesn't become codependent or unhealthy.
mm.
Um, but when you're in it and when you're a kid and things like that, it's finding people that you can connect to. Um, I think that was probably the biggest thing. And even to this day, like I'm big on the connections I have with people. I can't do anything with anybody if I don't really feel a connection, or if I don't feel like they're good people for me.
Mm,
They might not be bad people, but they might not be my people.
mm, mm. I feel like again they're gonna charge for this tomorrow. Get these free therapy right now. These little therapeutic jewels right here. But I asked for personal reasons as well because me and my wife had talked about we were learning the difference between fostering and adopting, but also she doesn't want to have any more kids, but she wants girls. And so I'm like, if we can get
Mhm.
siblings like some and give a home to two siblings, that would be good because then we'll have two boys and two girls to complete our family and really like complete our family. Like I wanted someone that we can, really develop that bond with and build that trust.
Mhm.
Like they have to see if we're fit for them just as much as we seeing that they're fit for us. So I was asking for both ends and for the people who are going through that similar story that trying to find their way and navigate. Did you ever like seek out your parents and that capacity to see to figure out the answer? So like my dad wasn't in my life, so I went to like find him to figure out what happened, like why the story behind how you got into the foster care system.
Mhm. Yeah, I know my parent. My mom has passed away since. But she's always been in my life. She had cancer.
Mm,
Um, and she had some other personal issues that she was dealing with as well. But she's had cancer almost all my life.
Mm,
So at one point, like she would be in and out the hospital and things like that. So that was how we got into the foster care system. I know my dad, but I don't know him.
mm,
I know who he is. I know his first, middle, last name. I don't have a relationship with him. There's been times in my life where I've reached out and tried to reach out. Um, I've been mad at him. I've blamed him for the lack of growth in my life. And I've hit the point where I've came to peace with my attempts.
mm,
And that was tough. Because I again, I never hit that point. I don't hate my dad. Like I still love him, but I just don't know him. So that was tough because there was always a time where I'm like, all right, I want to see this come. I want to see this relationship happen. I want to do this. And it just never really came to fruition, which I had to come to terms with. And the other thing I will say is like there's still times where I can get upset about it. There's still times where I'm uncomfortable when I see how my oldest brother is with his daughter, and I'm like, he had so many families before he had his own family,
mm,
and that is how I had to make it make sense because he stumbled through life so that I wouldn't have to.
mm.
And I don't think he did it just for me. Like that's just who he is. And that's why I said like he has all the traits of like a good person. So that really helped me with that loss feeling. Um, but as far as like foster care, like I think it's so many phases that go through it, and it's I commend any foster parents that do it in a good and healthy way, and they're not just doing it for the money or they're not doing anything malicious. Um, because it's a tough thing to do because you are working through so much of what those kids
Previous,
bring and what they've
yeah.
been through. Um, but if you can make that connection, like there's some great kids. And even in the groups and stuff we did, like I've met a lot of great people, and there's still some people that I'm connected with. Um, but it's that patience is important.
Yeah, no, and that's my laptop's about to die, and I ain't wanted to die in the middle of the conversation. But nah, and that's the ultimate goal. I even told my wife, like, even when we decide to make that decision, whenever we do it, I want to build that trust over time before even considering that, like even if it's going there, like volunteering something, you know what I mean, doing something
Hmm.
to build that trust over time, and then making that actual thing. Because the worst thing you can have with kids is popping in and out of their life and not having them like feel wanted and needed, and you almost
Hmm.
biologically you have an obligation, you would think anyway, to the kids that you produce. But that's even a tougher hill to climb when you don't have no biological connection.
Yeah, and that was the thing. And like I know, like it would have been hard because like for me, I grew up fast. Um, so even in all the stuff that I went through, like when I tell you like I'm good at isolating,
Mm.
like
It's a
it's
talent.
not it is like it's crazy. And I hid it for 24 years, enough for people to at least say like, oh, that's how he always is. And that
Mm,
was my goal for a lot. Like I worked very hard to just blend in. And they're like, oh, that's just him, he's a quiet kid or he's this. And there was a lot going on. Um, and it was wild like that. I don't know. I don't know what it would have took at that time for somebody to break through that.
mm,
That's something that I'm still kind of exploring every day. And as I did counseling again, um, maybe like 3 years ago, 2 or 3 years ago. And that was the first time I actually had a counselor that I connected with. Um, and this is 5, 6 years into counseling, and it was still uncomfortable. Like,
mm, mm,
I knew what it all was, and it was still uncomfortable, but it was like realizing that I had to make the choice to want to be open, and I had to make the choice to do it. So I think there's also that part of it of like you can't take the ownership of somebody who doesn't want to grow just yet, or who I should say who's not ready, not who doesn't want to, but somebody who's not ready. And all you can do is kind of meet them where they are and do that and be more authentic than nice.
Mm.
I think that's a big thing. If you can be authentic, you can appreciate that much more than, oh, that was the nice lady or the nice man I met the one time.
Man, you spoke on something earlier that I wanted to dive into, and I have been starting to talk about it more publicly now because I'm coming to grips with it. But grieving a person that's alive, and like, and you said it with your dad and knowing him but not knowing him. I tried to give my dad, and we've been 10 years since my son is still be 10 years old, and when I found out that I was having my son, it gave me the curiosity to find out what was going on with my dad, why I don't have a connection, and why was he in and out. And so
Mm-hmm.
I started to do the research. I went and found him, or whatever the case may, got in contact with him. And then for the last 10 years, we've been building what I thought was a relationship up till last year. And long story short, I lent him money and I never seen heard from him again. And I don't even know if it was about the money or the fact that he couldn't repay me, but it was never about the money. I just was trying to look out. And um my mom, family members, different people were telling me like how much of an ain't-ish person he is and all of these different things. But I wanted my own experience with him. I was trying to give him the
Mm-hmm.
opportunity to prove everybody wrong. I guess that's the young boy still trying to yearn for the father. And what you just said is the experiencing that I'm having now of like he is who he is, and he may not be ready to grow, but now you have to decide what boundaries do you put in place to protect yourself from that,
Mm-hmm.
type of pain or whatever that relationship caused. And I'm in that process now of developing it, because right now, my birthday next week, well, I don't want to say because I don't know when it's coming out, but my birthday's coming up, and um the the new me wants to just delete and cut everybody from that side of the family off. I never had a
Mm-hmm.
relationship with y'all. I was trying to build one. I see why I never had a relationship with y'all. So now I'm ready to cut it off because of that. And to that you say, what, as a therapist, but as a man and you protecting yourself, how do you cope with the fact that this person is alive but they're almost dead to you?
Um, I still so I in the last few years I've had conversations with his sisters and brothers. So my aunts and uncles that I didn't know. Um, and that's been cool. Like it's been cool, and it's been the separation because I know my one aunt specifically, like I'll talk to her and I feel comfortable with her. Um, but with my dad, I reached out to him last year, uh, and I still don't really know where I'm at with it. It was like last year or 2 years ago. I called him. I got his number, called him, and his wife answered.
Mm,
And I had this awkward conversation with his wife. And at the beginning, she said, not awkward because of her, but awkward because, like, at the beginning, she's like, "Oh, he's sitting right here." I never talked to him that day though,
mm,
and I don't know why. And I was good up until that point, good. And I was like, "Are you serious? Like,
right,
what, what was that?" Like,
right.
and that for me was, you have my number. You can reach out. I've tried enough. I and that was what I had to do. And from that point, I allowed myself to feel however I felt related towards that. And that's kind of the irony of a lot of these situations where, like, I don't really talk to my oldest brother about reaching out to my dad because
Mm,
he had a different experience with him, and he had his own stuff. So I don't want to put that on him because I don't know if he's at a place where he wants to have that conversation, but I know he would try for me,
mm,
and I don't want to put him in that predicament. So I at this point, and a lot of what my practice is, and a lot of when I work with males is like, if you Google an emotion wheel, It's expansive. And if you think about what you allow yourself to experience through the day, you can probably, at any given point when you're guarded, you can pick like 2 or 3 emotions out. And my daily practice is to have a space where I can feel however I feel. And most of the time for me, it's in the shower, because the shower is such a specific time where it doesn't duplicate really. There's nowhere else where you have an experience and you're like, oh, this is like when I was in the shower. Yeah, yep, that's a perfect one. But you have an emotional, so you don't have anything where you're like, this is like when I'm in the shower. So in when I'm in the shower, it's my time to explore my emotions. It's my time to really talk about how I'm feeling. It's my time to really get into the depths of what you just shown, like that outer circle that really shows I'm not just angry, I'm hurt,
Mm,
I'm distraught. I'm not just sad, I'm in pain, and there's so many emotions, and I really get to feel how I feel, and I don't have to limit it to, oh, I'm angry because he didn't answer, because he didn't talk to me. I'm hurt by that. And how could you do that? And what did I do to deserve that? And I allow myself to have all that. But before my morning process is done, when I'm done getting ready, at some point there's something I have to say about myself to the strength of I'm okay.
mm,
And it's not about being okay in like a hiding way. It's like I was able to explore all of those emotions and I'm still doing okay. And the more I can make that normal, the less when it happens, I'm more prone to a panic attack because I'm letting it build.
mm,
I'm not letting these things fester up in me. I'm having that moment, but I'll reach out to my friends as well. And I, even with my practice now, I still have somebody that I talk to for supervision and consultation, and I make sure that I'm keeping myself in line. I had one other person I'll tell you about, my supervisor when I was getting my license. She was, man, she was like the best person. I'd almost stopped counseling, and I was going to go straight into barbering. And I actually 2 weeks before the pandemic, I was about to put my 2 weeks notice in, and
mm.
everything shut down. And I was like, I'm gonna just hold off on that on that 2 weeks. Um, but I was very close to finishing my license, and I essentially gave up.
Mm,
And for myself, with the isolating and everything, when I give up by myself. I don't give up with other people.
mm,
I don't allow a lot of people to know what's going on with me. So if I change course, nobody has to know. Um, and she was the person that knew. And when I talked to her, she didn't try to talk me into staying in counseling. She didn't tell me she was upset. She didn't say, oh, you're so close or anything. She just supported where I was at. And I'll say this first, I didn't allow anybody to be that in my life. And as a result of that, I didn't have anybody in my life like that. So it wasn't because of people, it's because of me.
mm,
But having her there, I was able to work through that discomfort of like, I've been working on this for so long. Why am I not licensed? Why don't I have my own practice? I'm tired of work. I was working in Gettysburg at that time. I was like, I'm tired of working up here. I'm tired of being uncomfortable. There was so much going on with me, and I was able to work through all that with her. So that is how I do it when it comes to stuff with my dad. And there's people who know about my dad that I can talk to, like friends. But that's what I'll really do. Like I'll just allow myself to not have to be numb or okay for a moment. And then after that, I realized, like, in spite of that, I can still do and be who I need to be. And I always look up to people like you, like even when we was at the conference, and you was there with your son, I'm like, that's the stuff that's like, I see that and I get excited, because it's breaking down, not even knowing your history at that time, but it's like our generation is not about just leaving their kids.
mm,
And all my friends that have kids, my one friend Chris, he has kids. this dude is so excited to be a dad, and I love to see it. And if everybody would have known him like when I met him and everything, like he's a change. He's a change. He wasn't terrible, but he's different, and he's happier. Like I talk to him and he's excited, and I enjoy talking to him, and obviously my brother. But anytime I see it, and it's not so much about people flaunting it. You was there with your son, but you wasn't like, oh, I'm the dad that takes his son everywhere.
Mm,
But you felt that.
mm,
You felt that you had a connection with your son. Your son was comfortable.
mm.
And that's not something that just happens. Like you build that with him and he feels safe with you. And that's the part that I'm talking about where you're unlearning so much of what you experience just to give him a proper upbringing to where he's not even going to know. He's not going to know what he's missing out on. My niece, she is not of the hood. like she cannot, she's not. She's the person that's going to have to prove that she grew up in Philly. Like she's
Mm.
not. And it's cool to see because my niece she's so smart. And my nephew as well. They are just so themselves. They are themselves no matter what. Nobody can stop them. And I look at them and I could never do that when I was a kid.
Mm.
So to see what their parents and the people in their lives was able to be like, be yourself first and then figure everything else out around that. It's dope. Like, oh yeah.
No, that's exactly what you said. So many things, man, and I appreciate all of that too. Because to go on to the to follow up to the point that you were making, I've spent so many of those years, those 10 years while my son was born, trying to figure out why my dad wasn't there. And then I'm like, I'm giving away the stuff that my son is seeking from me. I'm still fighting for the boy that didn't get his, whereas there's a boy that's like, oh, well, you can give it all to me. Like, I'm right here. And that
Yep.
was the switch. The conference was the switch. I'm like, all right, you with me now. Like everywhere, every chance that I get, that car ride up is a bond, that car ride back is a bond. Like these different things are a bond, and being able to build that trust and that vulnerability and that safety that you were talking about, and trying to learn that. Now what you said is also true, where Rich and Bro, they call my son Dylan because he don't even know that he grew up in like Philly. So it's like he's unapologetically him. And I'm like, all right, we got to make sure you still be able to fit amongst your people too. Like you still got to be able to like, relate. You don't want to go in and like people.
Oh yeah.
It's something you got to put in them a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah, and that, there's a thin line between like being yourself and being weird.
Yeah. Facts.
And and the weird is not about different. I think that's the different thing about like and this is where I start feeling old, but like the kids now, they they're so accepting that when somebody's weird.
Yeah.
Like when we was growing up, it's like something's off.
Off. Yeah.
like it's something off about you. I don't know what.
Yeah.
And then you just see like, oh, he like watch anime. Maybe that's why you're weird. But
Yeah.
then everybody grew up and everybody's watching anime now. So it's like that wasn't the weird
Nothing's
part.
weird
Like, no,
anymore.
like you was weird in your own way. Like
That's
you
it.
had
You got
something
your
else.
little, everybody got their little hiccups, and that's cool.
Uh-huh.
But you still got to have some sense of like community where everyone
Of course, of course. And that's the thing. Like I was saying with my clients, like I'll always be excited. I just talking about like small things, little things. Like you reach out to somebody and you connect with them on just the littlest stuff growing up. And I was talking to my brother the other day, and we was talking about how we ate when we grew up, when we was growing up. And we was eating pork and beans, rice, and hot dogs. And my brother doesn't really like spaghetti now because we ate spaghetti like
so
5 days
much.
a week.
Yeah.
And it's just that little stuff. Like it's always good to be able to connect in the little games and the stuff you have in common. But it's okay to have your own interests too.
Yes. 100%. Man, the time flew, man. This has been a great conversation. Is there anything else you want to leave the people with before we end out? In regards to Black mental wellness or wellness period.
I would say more so just don't ignore what's going on with you. It's a lot easier to tackle something before it gets to an emergency.
Mm.
And don't be scared. Every opportunity I get, I like to talk about suicide. And I think the difference between somebody wanting to follow through with hurting themselves and somebody feeling hopeless or helpless is very important. And it's very important for you to be able to address it at that point when you feel that way, and when you can talk about it, and when you say, like, I either have thoughts of it, or sometimes I don't want to be here. Like, everything doesn't get you locked away into a psych hospital. So the
Mm.
sooner you talk to somebody, the better. And that's one thing I always, and talk to people as frankly as it comes to your mind, because that's the only way that you'll know what's going on with you. So that's my big thing for anybody. Like, when you're struggling, like, reach out.
Man, that's a great way to end it off. Please share. Corey dropped so many gems this fast. I don't think I'm this one of the ones I'm gonna go back and listen to, because I was in the moment so much that, again, I ain't had nothing to prep with, so I was in the conversation. But now I gotta go back and see, like, I missed that part. I wish I'd have asked him something deeper on that. Like,
Mhm.
but we'll do another one, I'm sure, man, and had this conversation in different capacity. Because this was more of your story, but even giving out like therapeutic techniques like that, I try
Yeah,
to
of
get those
course, of
free
course.
gems. Um, on that note, please share this episode with someone. Share a gem. Leave a comment of something he said, a quote, something that we could, get people to listen to this episode. And make sure y'all leave a review on iTunes. And on that note, please remember that this platform has never been about it being a replacement to therapy. It's an alternative place where people share therapeutic stories. Thank you for listening.